Hello, and welcome to Truth Wanted. I'm your host, ObjectivelyDan. This is the Kalam show where we talk about what people believe and why every single week. And joining me this week is an Australian YouTuber. You can tell because the image is flipped here. It is Mr. Bear from YouTube. Mr. Bear, hello. How are you today?
Hello there. Hi, Dan. How are you?
There we go. Okay, sweet. Mr. Bear is a content creator on YouTube. In case you haven't heard of him, he is an ex-Catholic who just started making videos back in June of this year, so pretty recently. He reached out to me, asked to be on the show, and here he is today. So how's it going tonight, Mr. Bear?
It's going great. Absolutely great. Thanks for having me. I'm very thrilled to be on this show.
Yeah, for sure. So, for people who are first listening to you for the first time, what is the kind of content that you focus on?
Yeah, sure. Look, I like to respond to YouTube videos, usually fundamental Christian videos, and basically break down not only what they say, but what they mean. And I like to use clips from movies or films and make my own clips, ads, movie trailers, just to add some humor to the commentary and just explore the reason and logic behind the videos and what they're saying and how they apply what they're saying to religious theology.
And we were just talking a little bit before the show, but I actually didn't know that you actually only became an atheist pretty recently, like only about a year ago, right?
Yeah, exactly right. At the end of 2018.
At the end of 2018. So, what was the journey before that like? Were you a pretty devoted Catholic? Were you always kind of on the fence about things, or what was that experience like?
Yeah, look, it was one of those things that God was a part of my life every single day. I didn't attend church. I mean, I went to school. Every Friday we went to church in primary school, and it was a fire and brimstone type mass every Friday. So I was exposed to that side of religious theology, and also I went to a Catholic high school as well. Towards halfway through high school, I changed and went to a public school and was exposed to a lot of other faiths and religions, and that, I suppose, started me onto a long deconversion, which resulted in me stepping away from religion altogether last year. Yeah, so it was quite a long journey, and having a what they call a personal relationship with God, and that was with me every day.
Yeah, I can relate to that as well, as far as with my story. It was emphasized that this wasn't a religion, right? It was a relationship. That was kind of the go-to kind of phrase there, because that was how it was supposed to be ideally, in your faith, right? You're supposed to pray every day, read as much as you can, go to these Bible study groups, be in community with people. And that's something that when I first deconverted, I really missed, because it was this was the lifestyle that I kind of cultivated. And now it's wow, I'm really glad I am away from it. But there's pros and cons to viewing your religion in that sense, right? Obviously, I think both of us would agree there's more cons than pros, but there certainly were kind of benefits to that, at least in my experience.
Yeah, there were. There was that sense of connection and being a part of something larger than yourself. And I suppose there's a lot of comfort in that for people, which I understand.
Yeah, for sure. I was saving, for those of you watching YouTube live here, Matt Dillahunty just walked by and he just gave me a glare, and I just waved him goodbye. He's just being goofy. So that's something that I don't feel like a lot of atheists talk about too much when we talk. I mean, the content that we make on YouTube is a lot of, I'd say for the majority of it, it's breaking down other people's stuff. You know what I mean? And there's nothing wrong with that. I think there's a lot of merit to it. But it's hard to, I think one of the things I struggled with when I was first kind of coming out was finding other people to relate my experiences to.
Yeah, absolutely.
At least at the time when I was kind of looking for stuff, I didn't realize, because I had known people who were really strong against religion and stuff, or at least I was watching people who were like that. But obviously there was a transition, right? There was a before and after, and it's hard because we don't always get to see the before with a lot of people who make that kind of stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah, true. That's right. Exactly right. And it's the background. Sometimes you see the first thing you see obviously makes a first impression, because that's the first thing you see. But it's like when you're debating theists online now, or anyone of religious background, you have to really realize their background as well, and take that into consideration, which is where the epistemology comes into it, in terms of challenging that and why do they believe what they believe.
Absolutely. What a great question. Hey, somebody should make a whole show exploring that kind of concept. Wow, amazing stuff. Yeah, just kidding, obviously. But so I got to ask you, though, so the Mr. Bear whole kind of persona you've crafted here, with the cartoon avatar, can you explain a little bit why you chose that? Because I think it's great. I like the design you have.
Yeah, sure. Look, it's my wife's nickname for me.
Ah, okay. All
and
right.
So when we met a long time ago, back in the 90s, 1999 to be exact, that was the nickname. I suppose things got hot and heavy, and when my shirt came off, that was the nickname.
That's fine. So how come your avatar isn't you with your shirt off then, like a shirtless guy?
Catholic guilt.
Catholic guilt. Oh man,
it's still there some days.
I'll be
honest.
Is it still there for you? Like,
I'll be honest. If I'm tired, run down, and not feeling great, yeah, it can be there. It can be. It's.
How does that manifest for you? Like, in what ways is it still kind of, like
something will set it off. Like, I'm a big sucker for soothing music set to beautiful images. And so every time I see someone affirming their faith, it takes me back to how I felt.
Yeah, I can relate to that in some ways. I think for me, one of the things I had to really get over, and I'm pretty open about this talk, but was like the sexual parts of that whole process. You know what I mean? Like how, seriously, like how to deal with just relationships in general, because if you're really involved, like you or I were, I mean, like the way you navigate those kinds of things is completely different than you would, without all those like rules of engagement, really is what they are, right? It's like, oh, you have to do things a certain way, and you have certain roles and responsibilities, and if you're thinking these thoughts, this is wrong, and if you're doing this is wrong, like, it's a whole rule book that you're supposed to play by, and like that was hard for me to shrug off for a long time. It was like, oh,
that's right. That's right.
I feel uncomfortable with this. Like, I can't do this. And it's like, oh, that's just the thing that was cultivated in my brain since I was a kid. It was
absolutely challenging. And especially when you're a teenager, and especially when your grandmother lives with you.
Oh,
who is devoutly religious. So we're in a fairly modern society here, but having the old country beliefs living with you when you're 15, 16, exploring that side of yourself is really challenging.
Yeah, for sure. And where I grew up, I had a lot of older folks, kind of in my vicinity too. So yeah, that kind of get passed on to you. And like you want to make people proud, because they're watching you, and you want to be able to, with people's expectations. And eventually that kind of manifests into your own subconscious, where it's like these people's expectations for you become your own expectations for yourself. And then you kind of battle with that. So yeah,
that's right. And to go on a slightly different track, if you have a concept of heaven, okay, so let's go back to when you were 15 and I was 15.
Yeah.
What was your daily habit, right? Can I just say that?
What was my? Are you asking me, or are you gonna give me an example?
Well, let's just say it: masturbation.
Oh, okay, yeah. Okay, I should have figured where that was going. My brain did not put two and two together. But yeah, absolutely, of course, right?
Let's just go there, right?
Yeah.
And so, if you have a concept of heaven, well, there are women in heaven, aren't there?
It depends on which heaven you're going to. Mormon heaven, I think they separate them. I'm not sure though. I'm not an expert on that. But
okay.
Yeah.
We'll
in general, our version of heaven, right? The one that we had. Yeah.
Yeah, and these women perhaps posed for certain magazines in the past, right?
Okay, all right. I'm interested to see where this goes.
Well, they're watching you, aren't they?
Yeah. So, yeah, it's this idea of like,
So
yeah.
you have this thing going through your head, and then do you see? I don't know if you see where I'm going with that.
I
but
see where you're going with this. Yeah,
this is part of the thing that hangs over you in terms of religion.
Yeah,
it's always there.
Your ancestors are watching you masturbate.
Yeah, and the women in the magazines are watching you because
and the
women pose in the magazines.
Yeah,
and
they're
not with us anymore.
Is it? It's funny to say out loud. Like it's humorous, but it's like that is the real mindset. That is 100% the real mindset.
I'm just being honest, and so you try to justify it with yourself and say, well, maybe they're proud.
Maybe they're proud. I don't know. Like, I think it's like, what are you doing up in heaven? Are you just bored enough where you got to watch,
That's right.
People do that, right? But
that's right.
Yeah, I like that. I'm sorry that you have to, that still manifests for you. I think I could speak for a lot of us when they say a lot of that does go away. I don't know if it goes away for everybody, though. I definitely hear from people who are like, yeah, like I deconverted like 10 years ago, and I still have anxieties about going to hell and like man, oh gosh, when I was a kid, I read the Left Behind books, like way too young. Like I remember picking up the first one when I was like in 4th grade, and I couldn't read a lot of it because I couldn't read as well. But like it was one of the books at like the teacher's library at my school, right? Like the teacher, they had their own books in the corner. That was one of the books, and it's like I had no idea this was like what was supposed to happen at the end of the world, right? Like at the end of time. And so like this was my first kind of exposure to that. And of course, I'm a kid. I don't know. I'm assuming this guy knows more about the Bible than I do. And it's just like, whoa, like this is crazy. Like I didn't know this. Like that's super scary. And like that, like I would go home some days and I would see like some clothes laid out on a kitchen chair or something like that. And I would like, is this it? Is this the end times? Did I just get left behind? Like that would super happen to me.
It's horrible.
Like, I don't know.
So these ideas latch on into your consciousness, and they're simply ideas.
Oh, for sure. We lived by some train tracks at my house when I was a kid, and so sometimes the house would shake a little bit. But every once in a while, like I would just feel the house shake a little bit, like it's like, it's the reality that some people live in still to this day. Like, and it's weird to us now. I think a lot of us, because for those of us who have been out a bit longer, it's like, oh, like people are still thinking like this. Like, yes, like I feel like I'm a million miles away from where I used to be. So if I could think back to like where it was just a year from my deconversion, I can surely see kind of, the distance has not been closed, right? There was definitely still some stuff I was working through. So
okay. Yeah. So look, it's nowhere near as bad as it used to be. Let's be honest, let's be clear. But look, every now and then, if the time is right, I get those feelings.
Yeah. And you just went straight to YouTube. You just like jumped on the train. Was it YouTube that kind of helped you in your deconversion a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, there was nothing really available in libraries or through literature that really showed an alternative viewpoint. I mean, there was the Celestine Prophecy and all these other New Age books I was exposed to when I was younger, but they came across as fiction to me. And sure, there was the Quran in the library, and there was things about Buddha, but because there was no connection there, they didn't mean anything to me. So with YouTube and the advent of the internet and information and sharing and Google Scholar and papers and everything being available, it's opened up that world.
Yeah, that's another point to bring up too, where it's like, the internet has showed me, hey, there's a whole group of kids that had their own little subculture of like fears and anxieties from the Quran and like from their Islamic communities and stuff. It's just like, whoa, like this is cross-cultural here. Like we've all kind of have these problems, and now we grew up with these ideas.
So I thought you weren't allowed to say these things online.
Yeah,
that's how naive I was. And then I watched these videos with Vice Rhino, Godless Cranium, etc. And I realized, well, you can say this stuff.
Yeah, you can, and there's consequences for saying it, that's for sure. But it's cool that I'm glad I get to be a part of a platform that's open to having these kinds of conversations, even if we're talking to people that don't agree with us with our current points right now. Which, by the way,
yeah, sure.
If you are watching this right now, this is a live call-in show. We have a number down there at the bottom. We would love to talk to you. We're talking about kind of atheism and religious upbringings right now, but really this is a show where we can talk about any ideas you want. Want to talk about crystals? Want to talk about Bigfoot? Flat Earth. We had a lot of flat Earth calls last week. I mean, we've been talking about all kinds of stuff. So please come on into the conversation. We are open-minded. This is Truth Wanted. Tonight with me is Mr. Bear, and I think we're about ready to get to some calls here. What do you think, Mr. Bear?
Oh, sounds good.
Cool. All right, I want to get to this call here. This is Ayo in Texas. Am I saying this right?
Dan?
Hey.
Yes, sir.
Ayo, I like it. That's a good name. So I see here that you want to talk about the historical Jesus, right?
Yes.
Okay, give me some background on what you want to talk about here.
Okay, well, I've been debating with this dude online, and he's telling me I'm being foolish for not accepting the biblical scholars' claims that Jesus was a real man in literal, like, non-metaphorical speaking. Just like, and I'm not convinced of this. I don't think the scholars are, I don't think they have enough evidence to even, I don't even see how it's even something that's educational.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is a debate that I'm seeing more and more happen. This idea that the historical Jesus may not actually, be a thing, right? That the collection of works that we have now that are talking about Jesus are really more of a mythical idea of a man, or their stories told, but they're not actually in reference to a real historical person. And you're right in the sense that most biblical scholars do concede that Jesus was a real person, but there is a minority of scholarship who says the other way. I got to talk to Richard Carrier last year, who's one of the guys who is a Jesus mythicist, as they call it. I've read his book, and I've read some other people, who talk about this stuff as well. And it is fascinating.
I'm familiar with him.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It's a fascinating talk because the stuff that we have now about Jesus. I mean, if it comes to the stuff that's actually in the Bible, right? Most scholarship dates that back to about 70 AD at the very earliest. And we're talking about like the book of Mark, okay? And, that's like not in the time frame of like Jesus being alive. Like that's a couple decades afterwards. And of course, there's apocryphal books as well, but there's this, we don't have any contemporary works of Jesus, which is, one of the arguments that's made. And there's some other stuff too about, the actual text itself we'll talk about, but it is kind of fascinating. Do you have a specific take on this, Mr. Bear?
Oh yeah, I'm not convinced. I don't see how we can jump to that conclusion that he was in fact a real person.
Mm-hmm.
I like to
earth.
Yeah, go for it, Mr. Bear.
I have a couple of ideas about this. I think that perhaps he may have been real. He most likely wasn't white. And perhaps none of the supernatural claims of him has been documented anywhere outside of the Bible. So he most likely was a real man. Another idea I had was reading more into it that I have been recently, that perhaps there's an idea that it was a number of people combined. There may have been a few charismatic preachers at that time that shared similar forward-thinking ideas and were perhaps combined over time through the rewriting of scripture. That's one idea. A couple of ideas that I have there. I think that most likely he was real in terms of what he did, less likely so.
So, Ayo, you're taking the stance of just absolutely not, super skeptical, definitely not a real person. What has convinced you of that claim that Jesus never even existed?
What convinced me that he's not?
Yeah, so like, obviously most people claim that he was a real person. So like, where does your skepticism lie?
Because the only thing we have to rely on is some writings that are ancient historical writings, but the Bible doesn't line up with history completely. I mean, so it kind of falls apart for me, and there's no any other evidence outside of the Bible that can cooperate with it. Other than, they bring up the Josephus and that other person that starts with an S. I can't remember his name, but it's just they say very little about. I just don't see how anybody could be fully confident that he was an actual person.
Yeah, so I think the three of us would probably agree, right? Like the claims about Jesus, we're pretty skeptical on that, right? All the miracles and stuff, the things that happen. I mean, like, I think all of us would be in agreement here that that's probably not the case, right?
Yeah, I agree.
But, it is a more interesting question, I think, of, well, was he even a real person? And like that would really change the scope of a lot of things, right? Because especially if we're talking about the New Testament, if we're talking about, the Gospels, it mentions all kinds of other people as well. And so like that would question, the historical legitimacy of like a whole bunch of these kinds of people in the Bible that talked about are in reference to Jesus in a lot of ways. One idea I think that's interesting is that Jesus was just kind of this conception of Paul, and the Jesus that we know now is the result of like a fabrication on his end and stuff. I mean, there's lots of little rabbit trails you can follow on this, and it's definitely worth a look into if you haven't already looked into this already. I would say, for my sake, I'm a little more 50-50 on this. I'm definitely skeptical of the consensus from biblical scholarship because, like, scholarship does change over time and stuff. And I've looked into a lot of what Carrier and other people have written, but I'm not 100% convinced that he wasn't either. Only because there's just a lot of questions that I would have to answer, I suppose, because we're talking about a lineage of people who were, it questions the whole idea of the origination of Christianity itself. I'd have to wonder how a lot of these Christian ideas specifically came into place. And there's some explanations for it, but it's definitely not a completely clear picture, right? So, yeah, that'd be my take on it.
No, it's not.
Mm-hmm. So
it's not a completely crystal clear picture at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and that's why I can't concede, whenever I'm talking to somebody who's telling me, oh, he was for real, and I'm like, you're going to have to have more than that. I'm not for like, oh, let's just erase, the Bible from our catalogs of books and stuff like that, but just not putting it into practice. Like I'm just, prayers don't work. Nobody's going to figure out how to walk on water. Jesus didn't leave us any methods on how to turn water into wine or anything like that. It's impractical to use in our daily lives. And I see it as a division being made in cultures, who's right and wrong.
Sure.
I just see it as being used as something that is divisive, and it should just be taken as a book of stories. It's a mythology to me.
Yeah, no disagreements here as far as religion being divisive, right? I think you're in good company as far as at least for my guest this week. I get a lot of different kinds of people in their opinions on here, but yeah, like there's definitely something to be said there, AO, about like what these stories can do, and like something about like how we interpret history, really changes the way that we view the world, right? If we accept certain historical narratives to be true, then that can definitely lead us, in different kinds of directions. I mean, there's so many examples you can point to this in history, and one of them is this idea of America being a uniquely Christian nation, and some of the things behind that.
Man, can I jump in real quick?
Go for it.
I have to say this, and I see it. I see it happening in my little town that I moved into about 4 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
The courthouse, at first, I thought was a church. They have 4 giant crosses on each side of the courthouse. For the first couple of years, I thought the courthouse was a church.
Oh, you got to call the FFRF on those guys, right?
I have actually talked to FFRF, and they have already made contact with the courthouse. And boy, did it stir up some stuff.
Really?
Oh, my goodness. Oh, yeah. It did.
I bet. Because that's people, man, when you mess with that stuff, people really get mad. Like, especially, I don't know where you live, but where I live, especially like in the Texas area, maybe not so much in Austin, but, that can really mess with people's egos. It's like, this is ours. This is our Christian nation. We are founded on the 10 Commandments, and you're like, you can't change this. This is who we are, and you're attacking our identity. And that's what it boils down to.
Yep.
Well, Ayo, that was a fun conversation. I'm glad we could talk about that at least a little bit. I mean, there's so many intricacies to, the scholarship on this kinds of stuff, and you mentioned the Josephus passage and just all kinds of stuff. I mean, like, one day maybe we'll have to go in depth a bit more on that kind of stuff for someone who's like super skeptical, who can bring up all the facts on that kind of stuff.
I think it's kind of funny because whenever I really started to call myself an atheist, I started digging into the Bible even more than whenever I was just on the border, being like, I'm agnostic, the possibility of God is it's possible. But since I've become an atheist, I research it so much more than I have ever, even whenever I was a Christian.
Yeah.
I feel
that's true for a lot of us. Definitely.
Same with me. Yep, yeah. Absolutely. Same with me.
Mr. Bear was an ex-Catholic, so he never read the Bible when he was, a religious anyway, right?
Only the New Testament.
What was that?
I just making a joke because, I grew up around Baptist circles, and the idea that they always said about Catholics was that, they never read the Bible anyway. So
that's right.
It was just coming from that. But it's definitely good to look into what you believe in, right? Good to read the books that you supposedly say are all true. And yes. We certainly did. So here we are, right? So we encourage other people, read your books, read what it says, and then we can talk about them.
Can I just say,
yeah,
I started that way. I started completely dismissing Jesus as a real person as well until I looked into just all I'd say is just branch out more, keep researching, and you'll see that there's probably some fairly good basis for it, but still there's nothing definitive.
Yeah, it's an open conversation. It's definitely something. That's one of those ones where it's like, you say you never know, we'll never know, and then we figure out more stuff. I don't know if that's one that we'll ever know, just because we're talking about a very, an ancient time period that we can only get so much data from, and we're only going to ever get less over time, as stuff from that time period fades away. So, but it is good to talk about. It is good to kind of question these assumptions that we've always had about stuff. So I say good.
Well, maybe he might return one day.
He might return one day, and then if he does, then I guess we'll know. But until then, I'm not going to hold my breath, right? Well, Ayo, thanks for calling. Really do appreciate it, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
You too, man.
All right, take care.
See you.
Yeah, historical. I think, you know what it is? I think when you first deconvert, I think you kind of get into a frenzy of research. I think that's pretty true for a lot of people. I know it was true for me, right?
Well, I've done the most research in the last year than ever before.
Yeah. And I'm like less, I feel like, I've read enough now to where I don't have to when I do my deep dives, they're just like every once in a while. They're not like every day like it used to be. But it is kind of a habit that people can get into because it's just like it's a whole new world that's kind of open to you. You know what I mean? It's just
a whole new universe, really.
Yeah, and it's interesting, and it's cool to be able to talk about it with other people who are also interested in that kind of stuff. Because, like, you know, like the stuff that you and I know, Mr. Bear, and the stuff that probably AO knows, if we talk to a lot of our Christian friends, like they either would have never guessed or like wouldn't believe us, and then would have to look into it themselves, and then you know it's a whole thing, right? It's there's leaps and bounds that you have to cross.
Exactly right. You know what compounds it as well? What compounds it is that when you actually come out as atheist, you actually get the backlash from other Catholics or Christians or whatever it was you're deconverting from. So that's another level that comes back to you.
Yeah.
When you expose yourself that you never had before.
Mm-hmm.
You're constantly questioned. You're constantly being told you never believed. You're constantly being told, well, you never receive the Holy Spirit, etc. It just goes on. It's another level on top of learning everything else.
And that backlash is what causes us to even form groups here, like the Atheist Community of Austin and other stuff, right? Because it's like, now, well, we got to talk about it to somebody, right?
That's right. Yeah, but we have to let it out somewhere.
Yeah, for sure. And so, I don't know, it hinders it almost in a way when that backlash happens. It doesn't help them at all. But that's why we have shows like this. So let's go ahead and go to another caller here. I want to say this is pronounced Elena. Elena in New York. Can you hear us, Elena?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great. How's it going, Elena?
It's Alana.
Alana.
Actually.
See, I knew I was wrong, but thank you for correcting me.
It's okay. It happens all the time.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. I don't have that problem with my name, right? Because it's just Dan. Like, there's not really too many interpretations you can go with that. But anyway,
I once heard someone pronounce it Dane. So.
Dane? That's a new one for me.
Yep.
Oh well, I wouldn't like that. If somebody called me Dane, I'd be a little miffed. So you have a note here saying that you want to talk about the internet and kind of the paths of deconversion, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Cat, leave me alone. Sorry, my cat's in my face.
Oh, of course.
So the internet was really important to me in my path to basically leaving religion altogether. I mean,
Yeah.
Congratulations.
It's kind of like, you know, for my whole life, I mean, I was kind of like one of those kids who always thought like going to church was a chore.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've always been like super skeptical, and then I discovered, whoa, there's a whole community of people that are like, don't believe in God? Excuse me?
I know, right? And a lot of you and I are lucky because, I mean, you sound younger.
Yeah.
I think you're a little younger than me, but like we grew up in a time where we could look up this stuff. You know what I mean? Like, I cannot imagine, growing up in a time where the internet wasn't a thing where we could access this stuff. Because I don't know if I'd have the fortitude to just go to the library and just kind of deep dive as much as you can so easily with the internet, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I'm like, so like when I first discovered like that atheism was a thing, I was looking into this guy on YouTube. I found his channel through like 2017, like, oh wow, all these people are so triggered, red hair, bright blue hair. Oh my gosh, there's 13 different genders type internet stuff.
Okay.
It was really toxic, honestly.
Yeah, like people talk about that stuff.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I stumbled upon a YouTube channel that talks about religion and like atheism, and I was like, this makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started like researching it, and then I mean it kind of sounds cliche, but like one morning I woke up and I was like, I don't believe in God anymore, do I?
Yeah, isn't that scary? Wow. I know it was scary for me. Maybe it wasn't scary for you.
Mortifying, honestly.
Yeah. Some people, they get a sense of peace with that. I was fucking terrified. I
was mortified when I woke up.
Not a pleasant experience. for me at all.
Yeah.
Mr. Bear, was it a pleasant experience for you? And did you have the experience of just waking up one day? Was it like that, or was it kind of more of a just like, oh, like if somebody asked you, like, oh, I guess I don't believe anymore?
It was a series of things that fell together very quickly, and I actually felt great about it. I didn't feel bad at all or terrified. I was quite lucky that way, I suppose. Hearing you guys, a couple of things fell together very quickly about how things about the world that, not a worldview, but things that came into being, and it's like the veil slipped away, as they say. To use a cliche, and I just felt free.
Yeah. I think deconversion stories are always super fascinating because so many people have so many different paths, and you can kind of tell like where people kind of cross into each other, you know, by going down the same way, but maybe they had some other experiences that led them other places. You know, it's never quite the same. Every person you ask, you know. So it's fascinating, and it's, you know what's cool, because like just to kind of go on a tangent here, all the Christians I know, I don't know a whole lot of Christians that became Christians later on in life. Most of them I know, it was just from birth, right? It's like the exact opposite in the atheist community. It's like almost everyone I know in the atheist community, they came to it somewhere in their life. And yeah, there's definitely some that, you know, have always been there. But it's like way more interesting because most people have real stories still. You know, when I was a Christian, it was like, oh, like, well, what's your conversion story? You know, like, how did you find Jesus? And it's like, well, I've kind of always had Jesus. You know, it wasn't really super interesting. But if you ask an atheist, like, oh, how did you become an atheist? Well, usually they can kind of give you a little tale about it, you know?
Yeah. I find that a lot of my friends at school, I'm still in high school, by the way. I'm young.
No shame here. Weird.
Have I mean, some of them were actually like raised from birth to be atheists, and they're like, that's like so cool. You got like a story to tell. It's like just my mom, both of my moms are like, my mom and my dad, or my dads were like, have always been an atheist, and I'm sitting here being born an atheist. But you got this like cool story about it.
Yeah. Well,
but a few of them that like weren't raised from birth were like, yeah, it was kind of like that for me too. And, you know, sometimes we talk about it, and, you know, it kind of really got me interested into that sort of thing.
For sure. I heard Mr. Bear wanted to say something here.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask if either of you ever challenged God to do something or prove himself.
Oh, yeah. I had that phase.
Yeah? What was that like for you?
For a solid, I'd say 6 months, I would, I think it was in middle school, like late 6th grade, I basically challenged God for 6 months. I would like, if it was raining, I'd pray for the bench to be dry. I'd be like, if you're real, then the bench is going to be dry. And if it's wet, then you're not.
Oh, man. Just like the story with
like,
the fleece in the Bible. That's great.
All I asked was God move.
One time it was actually dry, and I was like, whoa, what? Excuse me? Oh. But then I was like, but there's trees right there, and they've grown over the bench. That doesn't make sense.
All I asked was that God move one leaf.
Yeah? Did he move it?
A single leaf. Well, yeah, it moved eventually, but it was the wind, right?
So that's funny because like I always kind of self-confirm stuff. Like it was like, oh God, help me do well in this test, and then I do well in a test. Be like, yes, like there we go. And then as I was kind of getting more skeptical, it'd be more like, well, can you text me? Like, can you do something like super kind of crazy? Because this other stuff, like this can be explained by other means. Like I'd be remiss if I just got a random text that said, hey, this is God at the exact moment I asked, right? Or something like that. And now I kind of have this running joke of, look, I have a call-in show. If God wants to call in, then he certainly can, and I'd be happy to talk to him. But yeah, like that's definitely, because like there's a fear surrounding like that. That's super taboo. If there's any Christians that are listening to this right now, I guarantee they probably got some goosebumps hearing that. Because for me, that was always a no-no. It's like, no, you cannot test God, right? Like that, you're not even worthy enough to do that. Like that's not even in your thing, but it's like, well, like I got to figure out somehow, you know, and like, is the reason why we're always afraid of this because we know deep down that like nothing's going to happen and that it's not going to, you know, do anything for us? I don't know. I think that's something people have to wrestle with themselves.
I had like verses cited to me about like a guy who tossed himself off a cliff to like challenge God to save him.
Wow.
Later, and it was I can't remember exactly the story. I remember like basically this guy was like, I'm gonna throw myself off a cliff, and if angels catch me, then God is real, and if they don't, well, I guess I'll find out either way.
Well, I know in the New Testament, Jesus tells a parable where he's talking to basically what's supposed to, it's kind of supposed to be Satan, but it's not really. It's a whole thing. Well, yes and no. It's a whole thing. Anyway, and the idea was that Satan was kind to tempt him to do things, be like, hey, look, you can jump off right now and the angels will catch you if you're really the Son of Man. And Jesus kind of waves him off and says, like, no, I'm not going to test God or whatever. So maybe that's what that's in reference to. But I know, like, the book of Job, for example, was something that I was told to read when I was doubting, right? And the book of Job, if you're not familiar, is the story of this guy who gets absolutely just his shit kicked in. Just like his family dies. He gets this terrible illness. He loses all of his wealth and stuff. And at the end, God is kind of actually talks to him and is like, you know, who are you to question me? Who are you to doubt me? And then by the end of the story, Job kind of gets all of his wealth back and gets a new family and stuff. But that was kind of the modus operandi for God, right? That I understood. It was like, well, this is how God is. You just can't question him. Like, yeah, he could totally do all this stuff, but you know, he's going to do it his way. You got to kind of follow his plan. So yeah, doesn't leave too much room for hope there. You know, it's just kind of like, well, you just kind of have to have faith. That was what it was for me at the end of the day. I'm sure other people, you know, there's definitely Christians out there who are like, oh, well, there's the specific evidence for stuff like that you have to, and that's how we know it's true. But for me, it was just faith. It was just a faith thing. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, lucky for me, I have issues with authority, so.
You Gen Z folks and your issues with authority. Of course. Just kidding. No, it's that's probably going to serve you well in some circumstances. Maybe not in all of them, but definitely in our community, it probably helps. Anyway, thanks for talking to us, Alana, and thanks for sharing your experiences with us. Keep having conversations with folks and denying authority when appropriate, right?
Yeah, I'm not going to like flip off a police officer just doing his job. That'd be stupid.
Well, you do what you got to do to get by, right? And hopefully the rest will work itself out. So take care, and thanks again for calling.
Yeah, you too.
All right, see you later.
Okay.
Yes. Oh, I accidentally dropped one of the other calls that was not Alana. Rookie mistake here, folks. Did not mean to do that. So if I accidentally just hung you up and you're watching, please go ahead and try to call back there. That's just because I'm enjoying an IPA here tonight. I'm becoming a real Austinite. I've got an IPA. I think I mentioned last time. I got a vape pen now. I'm just becoming just a regular person who lives in Austin now. I don't know what's happening. What's that?
Is that caffeinated?
It's got alcohol, so that's enough for me, I suppose. Yeah, I don't know. You know, I really should look at the ingredients of the things that I'm drinking before they go into my body, right? Like that's something I want to try to get better at. It's like, I want to understand like the chemistry of food and stuff like that, and what's actually happening to me because Lord knows there's some crazy stuff out there, right?
You know, that leads to some critical thinking as well, not to sort of draw a long bow here, but when you look at those sort of things, no added sugar, no added preservatives, it allows that critical thinking to lead to other aspects of your life. It's a good idea.
Yeah, that's certainly true. Definitely, like it's a cascading effect of like, oh well, I'm skeptical about this thing. What about this thing? And that doesn't always get you good results, but it's in general a pretty good headspace to be in. I think it's like, oh, you got to think about this. It's a start. It's a start. Okay, I think we got our call back here. David in New York. Hey, David, can you hear us?
Yeah, not New York, but yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, well, great. Sorry for dropping you there earlier, David. I'm glad we got you back on here. Well, cool.
No
I saw that you wanted to talk about going back to talking about Jesus again, right?
Yeah, so that's I've been hearing that come up again and again, and it's a really, really dumb argument.
Okay, so wait.
For a few reasons.
Wait, which is the dumb argument, that Jesus is real or Jesus isn't real?
The entire argument that even if if Jesus were real, then the entire Bible is true. Like,
oh yeah,
it's a very bad argument.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So if AO is still listening, the best way to respond to something like that is to point out that we are fairly certain that people like Muhammad and people like Buddha were actual people in history, yet we are not Muslim or Buddhist.
Yeah.
It is not if they existed. I have no problem with Jesus actually existing as a person. I want to know if he walked on water.
Yeah.
That's the thing you have to prove, and no historian worth their salt will ever go into that territory and say, "Yep, that happened."
Yeah, no, for sure.
As a matter of fact, the historians they'll probably point at is the one, Bart Ehrman. Mm-hmm. They'll probably point at him and be like, see, that agnostic says that Jesus existed, and not understand that the other 3 books in the series he wrote there is against Jesus being a divine being. So if they're quoting that, they should probably not do that.
Yeah.
Because their own argument tears it apart.
For sure. You could say, I mean, like David Koresh is a great example, from the Koresh shootings and stuff. Like, there's still Koresh followers to this day that said David Koresh did all kinds of stuff. We're talking about the guy who was in Waco in the 90s. And it's just like, well, David Koresh definitely existed. I cannot deny that. Like, there's so much evidence up there that that'd be crazy to say he didn't. But like the stuff that he said that he could do, or that he was the son of God, or all these other claims, it's a totally different category. It's definitely not the same thing. And I've heard other people say like, oh, well, we can prove that Jesus existed. Therefore, like I've legit heard people say that, and it is kind of just like, whoa, no way. Like, definitely not the same thing, right?
And on the second part, the historicity they're talking about is garbage, because the only source they have to take from is the Bible. That's actually from anything. So they're trying to prove the claim with that, but at the same time, a lot of those contradict each other, and like most of what they're going to say is going against any other historian claiming that, oh, no, that's not right either. And a really good thing to read about that, especially for the kinds of things that historians look at to verify, like, if a person was a person. David Fitzgerald wrote a great book. If AO is still listening, this would be a really good one to read. Nailed.
Yeah.
It's really, really good at going over just exactly what the criteria they're looking at is and why it's total garbage. It's stuff like, well, the reason that there aren't any history in Egypt about the Jews being slaves there is they would be embarrassed they lost the slaves.
Yes,
it's like,
I've
really?
read that too. Yeah, there's all kinds of...
That's the kind of garbage argument they're actually bringing to the table, being like, well, why else would they come out of the tombs? You're not even proving that they existed in the first place.
Yeah, like David Fitzgerald, I actually, I haven't met him. I have emailed him before because I did read his book and I asked him some questions and he graciously responded. I wonder if I can get him on Truth Wanted someday. I'm sure he'd be down. But there's
great.
There's definitely some reasons to doubt. I'm getting some nods in the audience here. Yeah, definitely some reasons to doubt. Like I'm still in the camp of I can't say I can say one way or the other. I don't know if it's definitive or not, but like there's definitely some bad arguments for his existence.
Yeah.
Which,
for me, I just say I'm not bothered if he was real. Show me he was divine.
Yeah, and that's the thing too. It's like, okay, he could be real, he could be not. Who cares? What about like the miracles, dude? Like that's the whole point, right? Like that's why we care about him.
Muhammad might be real, but I want to know if he actually flew to the moon on a horse and cracked it into with a scepter.
Yeah, exactly.
Show me that.
Yeah,
that's what I need.
That's what I need too, for sure.
Yeah, not this garbage that there was a dude called Jesus.
Yeah, that's another thing you can just bring up. Like, well, do you believe Muhammad was real? Yeah, of course. It's like, okay, well, and then therefore
It's just
Islam is
yeah.
true. Like, no, that's not. You know,
Yeah,
you can't.
exactly.
You can't go that way. That's not how it works. So.
Scratch a little bit below the surface, and you see how bad an argument it is.
For sure. Any comments
Yeah.
on this, Mr. Bear? Have you heard a lot of these arguments before? As far as
Of course. And look, there's even supernatural claims in in the life of the Buddha, in that flowers bloomed when he walked, and he spoke when he was born, and things like that. So there are supernatural claims that carry over into other. You mentioned Islam there, and it's amazing how with Buddhists, they're not going to be militant about the supernatural claims of the Buddha.
Yeah.
As much as Christians are so-called militant about the supernatural claims of Jesus. So it's an amazing comparison in relation to that.
So here's the thing. If I die, guys, like an untimely death, I really want you guys to spread rumors about stuff that I could do. Okay? Like, I want you to say I could do all kinds of crazy stuff, and we just couldn't get it on Truth Wanted because we didn't have time. Or, I don't know. Make something up for me. You're gonna have to delete this episode, by the way. Delete it from the archives. But like
you communicated with a non-existent being in a non-existent country.
Yeah, that's right. I'm talking to a cartoon character right now. I made this cartoon character talk. It's amazing. Well, great. We just got a bunch of new calls coming in, so I want to go ahead and take those. But David, thanks again for touching base, and we'll look forward to hearing from you again soon. Just got a whole bunch of calls coming in, so I just want to jump straight into it. I want to go back to, hey folks, it's an old friend of ours. It is Dean Meadows in North Carolina, our first theist caller for tonight, but not the first time he's called into this show. Hey, Dean, how's it going?
Hey, what's going on, Dan? I was just, doing some study for my class that I'm taking, and I realized that I hadn't called Truth Wanted in a while. I figured I'd give you guys a ring.
Heck yeah, dude. So last time, if you guys are followers of the show, I've actually got to meet up with Dean in real life. He got to come down to Austin for a bit and hang out with us, which was really cool. We ate some barbecue and had a good time. So more power to you. Hope things are going well, Dean. And did you want to?
Going good.
Cool. What did you want to talk to us about today?
So one of the things that I often hear from the atheist side of the aisle, the equation, is that there are all these reasons for Christians to doubt what they believe about Jesus, about the Bible, about the existence of God. And I guess I want to turn the tables a little bit and just kind of ask.
Were you going to say devil's advocate and then you felt uncomfortable? Was that I'm sorry.
No.
I mean,
I have no problem saying
okay,
that.
all right. I didn't want to tease you there. I just thought it was funny. Yeah.
I'm not that extreme.
I know you're not extreme, dude. I just like playing with you, man.
No, I gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
So how often, I guess I have two questions.
Yeah.
How often do you and Mr. Bear, really go back and examine, why you believe the things you believe? And then two, of the arguments that Christians put out for God, not saying that you have to, obviously you don't adopt any of them, but which to you causes you to doubt your current position the most?
Okay.
So I guess my question is, as an atheist, is it, the Kalam that gives you the most, doubt about your current, state of affairs as atheist? Is it the
so in other words, which
yeah.
Christian argument is the most credible in our eyes?
Not necessarily. Well, yeah, most credible. The one that makes you pause a little bit and say, if that one is, while I don't believe that argument, that one gives me the most pause about my atheism.
Okay, yeah. So I think you've called in to ask a version of this question before. Well, you asked two questions there. First one, how often do I think about my beliefs and why? Every Friday night at 7 p.m. Central Time. But seriously though, I mean, like outside of this show, I try to make an active effort of like when I read the news, for example, looking at stories from multiple sources, like trying to do the best research that I can, based on the education that I have to be able to evaluate good sources and figure out, what's true and what's not. Like I like to think that that's a proactive, ongoing thing, that it's not like something like, oh, well, I thought about this again today and this, again the other day. It's more like I'd like to think for myself, right, that this is an ongoing thing that I'm having. Especially when I'm talking to, I get messages from people who are mostly from atheists and other people who feel for me, but also people who aren't and who ask me questions and things. And I enjoy having those conversations as well. And it does take me back to a place where like I was, and I feel like I could at least be in their shoes or at least understand where they were at, and get in kind of that headspace. Now, as far as like what I think is most credible, and then after I answer, I want to give some time for Mr. Bear to give his response. We talked about Kalam on here before. As far as like the classical, I would say classical apologetic stuff, none of it is really too convincing to me. Does it make me question my existence and place in the world when I think about the grand scheme of things and I think about, wow, my place in the universe and where I'm at? Yeah, like I think that's crazy. I think that where we are right now is amazing. But I also think it can only be the way that it is, because that's all it is. That's all it ever was, almost. You know what I mean? And before you quote mine me here and you say something that I don't really mean. When I say that, I mean I do think it's amazing that we ended up the way that we are, and it does look like sometimes that things are intentionally designed, or that there's like a plan in motion.
Why do you think I'm going to quote mine?
Well, because I don't want you to be like, oh, well, you think that there is a plan. Like, I don't think there's a plan necessarily, but I do think I think the world's cool, man. I don't know, Dean. Look, Dean, I've talked to some unsavory folks. Okay, unsavory folks. And, people are shady these days. So anyway, that's all I'll say about that. The arguments from design, I think, are fascinating. I think it is fascinating when you look at human systems in particular and just organisms in general. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm still pretty fond of the conclusion that I've come to, although I'm open to change. And now I want to let Mr. Bear give his response to those questions here.
Yeah, sure. Look, I like to explore my beliefs almost daily. I mean, I'm always on Twitter, so there's always going to be some sort of to and fro comments on Twitter. It's always something different as well, which makes me question. So I'm always discovering something new to learn and explore. I don't dismiss, because there could be something there. I suppose I'm always looking for something that will provide, I suppose, a good argument for God. I like to explore the origins of Christianity in the second century, like in terms of the Gnostic writings and that timeline of through the Persian empires and through the Greek origins and Latin. It's interesting. It seems to be, I don't know if pure is the word, but it seems to be close in terms of someone exploring the philosophical aspects of God. And I find that really interesting, because even they are doubting the nature of God in their philosophies, in terms of forgiving bad people, or if bad people continue to be bad, they realize that God will forgive them anyway. So they wrestle with these sort of concepts. And I'm interested in that aspect, because it seems to be that origin of this idea of the monotheistic God. In terms of anything that's convincing, it's really hard, because ultimately it is a philosophical basis. It's nothing tangible, nothing we can see, nothing we can prove, nothing we can demonstrate. And that's where I've come to where I am now, because it works without that. Yeah.
I'd say I think about what I believe more now than in the 20-ish span of years that I was a Christian. I would definitely say that's true for myself, right?
I agree. Yeah.
So there you go, Dean. Is that a satisfactory answer?
Of course it's not for you, Dan. No, I'm just kidding. It's great. No, it's fine. I can't wait to come to Austin again, hang out, eat some more barbecue with you guys. Allow you guys to roast me and I roast you back. So it's fun.
We got
But,
into some heated stuff. It was pretty funny, man. That's one of those things where you. I'm glad the camera wasn't around or microphone wasn't around. You know what I mean? It's just like we get some good digs in. But
no, it was a good time. It was fun. Continue to do a great job with the show, even though I disagree with you on everything. But I love the show. Love watching it. And I'll make sure to call in more frequently since I've been absent the last several weeks.
That is all right, Dean. Thanks for calling in.
Man, take care.
Yeah, thank you so much. Appreciate you, Dean. Dean, by the way, the first theist to ever donate to the Patreon of this show.
Well done.
It's really cool. I don't know. Actually, I need to check if he's still donating. He might have stopped. But no, Dean's a really cool guy. Really glad we get to talk to him. Just a neat dude. So we do have 3 other callers here. And so I do want to cut the kind of in-between commentary because I want to get to all of you guys. And one of you is a theist. This is Adrian in Texas. Hey, Adrian, you're on the air here with Truth Wanted. How's it going tonight?
Hi, Dan. It's going good.
Cool.
Thank you for taking my call.
Absolutely. What did you want to talk about with us?
Yes. First, I just wanted to say that before you talk about Jesus, you would have to first prove that there's a God, and that's what I want to do now.
Before we talk about Jesus, we first have to prove. Well, I don't think we have to if we're talking about a historical Jesus, right? We can talk about a historical Jesus without, or is that not what you mean?
Right. Yeah, I was meaning the Jesus that everybody thinks is God.
Okay. Jesus as Son of God. Before we can talk about Jesus as Son of God, we have to talk about God, is kind of your conjecture.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay.
That makes sense.
Yeah, go for it. Explain a little bit more.
Okay. I believe in a creator God because of the evidence that was left behind, like the moon and DNA and the distance from the sun that the earth is, and the tilt of the earth, and the tectonic plates, and the magnetic field, and the ozone layer.
Okay. That's 5 or 6 different things there. Cool.
Yeah,
Cool.
There's a lot of things that even the experts will tell you that we're lucky to have these things, and that they use the words like cosmic lottery and luck, and they just say things like that about these things, and I think that is evidence that points to a designer, especially when some of them even say that it looks to be designed and they don't know why.
Interesting. I want to let Mr. Bear kind of take control of this conversation, just to give him some time to talk and join in here, and then I'll kind of trail behind. So, Mr. Bear, do you have any response to any of this right here?
Yeah, sure. This is a really interesting viewpoint in terms of how everything appears to be quite perfect, is what you're saying, Adrian, in terms of everything suits life, in other words.
Yes, sir. That is what the experts are saying.
It's funny. It's when we go outside. What do you feel about the solar system in general, in terms of the planets and so on? How do you feel about those? Why they're there and what they're for, or if they're there at all?
Why everything else is made?
Yeah. Do you feel? Do you agree that there is Mars and Saturn and Jupiter and so on?
Yes, sir.
Why do you feel that they exist? Why is Jupiter there, for example? We can't really get within 100,000 kilometers of Jupiter, for example, without dying. Why do you think it's there? I'm generally curious.
Well, what the experts are saying is that it protects us from asteroid strikes, and kind of like a vacuum cleaner, cosmic vacuum cleaner, and it kind of sucks in the asteroids that are that would be heading towards us if they didn't hit Jupiter, like the one that they saw back in the 90s.
Oh, okay. Yep. Do you feel the planets have a purpose? Is that what you're saying there? They have a purpose to protect Earth?
This one does, and Jupiter does for sure.
Yeah.
And
what about Mars?
Could also show us how lucky we are, because there's the other ones. Most of them are in the habitable zone, Goldilocks zone.
Oh.
It's funny that I'm talking to a bear about Goldilocks, but
there you go.
Anyways,
it was meant to be.
The Goldilocks zone. The Mars and Mercury and Venus are also in that zone, but they don't have, the things that we have. It kind of shows us that we are, in like what the experts are saying, lucky.
So,
and
if I could chime in here, because I was just thinking about something the other day. I was looking at a piece of pyrite. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the mineral pyrite, Adrian, but I used to go rock hunting with my dad. And I was looking at a piece of pyrite. And one thing that's really cool about pyrite is that if you ever seen big chunks of it, they can get into these big cubic chunks. And they're really neat looking because it looks like somebody just sliced a knife right on the sides of it and made these giant cubes. But
I'm so sorry. I'm not sure. I'm not familiar with pyrite.
Yeah, it's Pyrite. And if you maybe pull up a picture on Google Images, you probably maybe have seen some before. I don't know. But I guess where I'm trying to go with this is, like I look at this pyrite and it looks really cool. It looks like somebody, like I said, just sliced a knife right through it. But if you know enough about physics and if you know enough about crystals in general and how crystals actually form and make their structures, you can explain exactly how this piece of pyrite formed the structure that it did. And there's nothing supernatural about it. There's nothing that needs to be designed about it. It's just it just kind of works out in a mathematical way, in so much that it just happens to form in cubes, whereas other kinds of minerals don't, because they don't have the same kinds of atomic structures that pyrite does. And so that got me thinking, because I thought, if I ever talk to somebody about design, I might want to bring this up, because I can show you this piece of pyrite and I can show you exactly how it works. And I don't have to have a creator God explanation as to why it is the way that it is. And so as atheists, we tend to extrapolate the same kinds of things when we look at other kinds of data. I mean, you mentioned a lot of stuff, right? The Goldilocks zone, the ozone layer, the magnetic fields and stuff. And I agree with you. Like, it's super interesting to see exactly how these systems are working and what they're doing for us. But I can also explain a lot of these things without going into detail on every single one that you mentioned, because you did mention quite a few. We can explain a lot of these things through our scientific observations, and I haven't found a single thing yet, and maybe there are some things where a God is absolutely necessary for an explanation for the things the way that they are. If there is, I'd love to hear it, but I would say that Mr. Bear and I probably haven't seen anything that we absolutely needed to have a creator God as an explanation for. Would you agree with me, Mr. Bear?
I would. Yeah, I everything seems to be explainable so far. There are things, of course, we don't know and haven't explored or discovered yet, which is that God of the gaps argument, where we say, well, that's God. But if we look at what we've learned in 100 years, even those things are DNA, etc. It's one of those things. It's like a never-ending tautology, because we discovered DNA and people say, well, God had that there already. And it's one of those things that we'll continue to endeavor. I'd rather continue to endeavor to explore and say, well, let's explore and let's see what we can find out, rather than default to saying, it's just God, because that it's okay to have that thought. I'm not going against that, but I choose to say, well, let's endeavor together and explore together and see what we can find out together, because who knows what we'll discover in the next 100 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think, to summarize, it's not that God couldn't be an explanation. It's that, we don't have enough reasons to assume that that's the best explanation, right? I think that would be our take on that.
Okay. I think what you're saying, let me see if I got this right, is that right now it looks like there is a God, but in the future that could change.
Well, we don't. Well, neither of us believe there is necessarily. I mean, not the Christian God, right? Like we don't have specific beliefs in any creator God, so we wouldn't say that a creator God was involved in any of the processes that you mentioned, as far as we know.
Yeah.
Right. I think you said that it was that it works fine without it, right?
Yeah, well, certainly, like we wouldn't be able to explain to you the exact origins of everything that we see, right? I don't think that neither of us would be knowledgeable on that. But like, as far as a creator God as explanation, right? You can imagine a room full of explanations that we can pick from. And we just don't go to the creator God one. We don't see a reason to be compelled to a creator God one rather than the other kinds of explanations that we see, right?
Okay, I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
Did you know?
Sorry. I can point to a really good example there, Adrian. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
When you
Go
mentioned,
for it. Go ahead.
you know, when you mentioned tectonic plates, how people, ancient societies would have seen volcanoes and thought that was a god, for example.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until we discovered tectonic plates that we had an explanation. That's one example.
Yeah, that's a great example, right? People thought that these big giant forces, and they thought, oh, there must be these big gods moving these things, or something making the thunder happen. And we found out there was other explanations for that, right? Yeah, that's a good example, I think.
I think actually most of those things that you're talking about, those ancient megaliths, those people, they say that the gods moved to those into place. They don't even claim that it was them that did it.
Yeah, I think it depends on the particular culture. But I think you had something else you were going to say too, right? Did we interrupt you there?
I can't. I don't know if y'all believe in God or if y'all are atheists, because most of the things y'all are saying are kind of agreeing with me. I think. I'm not sure.
Well, but, Adrian, have you considered maybe you're an atheist? I don't know. I mean, you say that there's a creator God, but like we don't. Like, you know, we see the same things you do, and we don't necessarily see creator gods as the best explanation for them. So I think we would both say we're confidently atheists, at least Mr. Bear and I.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm saying that it's more probable than no God.
I see. Okay. Yeah. So that's kind of a different thing, right? If we're talking about what's probable and what's not probable, what's more probable, less probable, stuff like that. Yeah, that's a whole other avenue we can definitely explore, at least for a little bit. Mr. Bear, you have anything on that?
Yeah, look, that's, like you say, it opens up a whole new avenue of what's probable and what's not probable. It's sort of going down the agnostic path, I would say, in terms of, well, look, there could be a God. But
I would say that I'm an agnostic.
Okay.
I'm an agnostic theist, and I think that everybody's agnostic because, you know, how that has to do with knowledge, right? And we're just talking about what the evidence shows, and that's what they do in courtrooms every day, is make assumptions based off of evidence to get to what we call the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, if that's good enough for like murder trials, then it should be good enough for you guys. But are you saying that that's not good enough?
I think that's a fair metaphor to make to an extent. I think, again, where we disagree is we don't even have the construct of a God to really, you know, use that as an explanation for the things that we see. So it's hard for us to make any kind of probabilities or assumptions about those probabilities if we don't even know what the probabilities of a God like that would be in the first place. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes, it would. I think it's just 1 out of 2, and then because it's either God or no God, right? And then you just plug in the gaps with the suspects. Those would be the suspects for the trial, and then you just see which one is more probable. And they actually have done the numbers on Nature, and it's not looking good. The numbers are like 700 quintillion to 1 that it was Nature that did everything.
I'm not sure. You know, I could go out to a field right now, and I could throw a baseball out in that field, and I could pull Mr. Bear aside and say, you know, Mr. Bear, the odds of that ball landing exactly where it is in that field is like 1,000,000,000,000 to 1. You know, like there's so many places in the field where that ball landed, but it just so happened to land in that place. And, you know, like if we're using an example like that, you know, it's almost not as impressive, right? Because, yeah, the ball could have landed at any other place, but it just kind of landed there. You know, it doesn't.
Well, if we're going to use analogies, shouldn't they be analogous?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, that's just one ball falling in a field. And I'm not saying there's just one thing. I'm saying there's a bunch of things that make it look like we're designed, not just one ball in one field.
What do you think? Is there any evidence of something that that would show us that we aren't designed? Is that something that we could demonstrate?
Yes.
Okay.
And I think that's what the scientists are working on right now.
I don't know. I don't know. Well, that's kind of a general term. You know, there's a lot of scientists. Aren't
they trying to figure out how nature works and how it made everything and yeah, I think that's what they're trying to figure out right now.
In general, the role of a scientist is to, you know, observe nature and figure out its mechanics. Yeah, I'd agree with you there. I'm not sure if it's the goal of a scientist to figure out who created it all. I think maybe if they found evidence of that, you know, they might publish something like that. But
well, they have. That's what I brought up first was the Richard Dawkins. He said himself that DNA looks to be designed, and he doesn't know why. There's other people like Paul Davies. There's Anthony Flew. There's different physicists and biologists and from different fields that are experts in their field, and they say that things in their field look to be designed, and they don't know why.
And you know, this is what I was kind of talking about with Dean in the last call. I think, you know, something like that would definitely give me pause if I was in one of their positions and I knew as much as they did about that subject. But, you know, the Richard Dawkins one in particular, you know, this actually isn't the first time I've talked about that particular quote with somebody. I think what Dawkins was trying to say there is that it has the illusion of design. You know, and if we're talking about specifically in his writings, I don't think, you know, Richard Dawkins is still an atheist. he's like, he doesn't believe in any kind of creator God. I think if Richard Dawkins was really convinced that what he saw was designed, you know, maybe that would turn his other way. Now, he could be in denial, and that's another explanation. But, you know, these scientists that you're referencing here, a lot of these guys are not believers. They are not as Christians in particular, but, you know, they're not even deists either. And, you know, that should sway you in some ways, I think, too. If these people who are looking at it and saying, yeah, this almost has the appearance of design, but still aren't believers, you know, what does that say about, you know, the things that they're observing?
No, because then I would be making a argument from authority fallacy.
Sure.
That would be like me presenting to you a deist scientist from any, you pick your own, you know, deist, and telling you that you should believe in God because this deist believes in God.
Absolutely.
And I know you can see how frustrating that would be.
Yes, right? And you're totally right. If I was to say, yeah, the reason why you shouldn't believe in God is because these people don't believe in God, yes. And I definitely wasn't my intention, but thank you for pointing that out because that is a valid criticism to have if somebody was to try to make that argument. But I do think because last time I had this call, somebody was saying, oh, you should believe it because these scientists are saying these things. And you know, again, like what we're saying right now too, Adrian, is you're also citing these scientists as, you know,
I'm citing atheist scientists, though, that say that things look to be designed.
Well, isn't that also an argument of authority right there?
No, because they're scientists and they're experts in their field, and they don't even believe in God, but they still think that something looks to be designed.
Yeah. Okay. I can. Yeah. I think we're kind of talking about the same things here.
There's another angle to this as well.
Yeah. What's that?
Adrian, have you heard about the anthropic principle?
Anthropic? Yes. Or I've heard of it, but I'm not. I
kind of like. Yeah, I like the weak. It's called the weak anthropic principle. It was defined by Brandon Carter. He basically just says that the universe's ostensible fine-tuning is the result of selection bias, where only in a universe capable of eventually supporting life will there be living beings capable of observing and reflecting on the matter. So it's almost like we are here, we do exist. based on this principle, this philosophy that, well, there had to be, otherwise we wouldn't be here talking about it. Does that kind of make sense as well, that viewpoint? It's a hard one to explain.
Yes, I don't know what you're getting at, though.
Just basically without anything behind a design, we exist because the universe favored life via selection, I suppose, is another way of saying it. Mm. It's a hard one to get your head around. It's a hard one for me to get my head around as well. But if you take God out, and that's a really hard thing to do, to just take God out and just say, okay, we don't know how the universe started. It had started, and it's resulted in life on this planet as far as we know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that we be the only ones to be able to talk about it, right? Like God wouldn't be able to talk about it with us. You know, we would have to make that conclusion ourselves. That's kind of
that's why I brought up the other planets in the habitable zone, because if it was nature that did all that, then we should be seeing life like us on other planets in the habitable zones. Around us at least, and also in the other places where we're looking.
Mm-hmm. But you also have to think of why there's going to be habitable zones in the first place. You know what I mean? Like, you know, I know you mentioned like the Jupiter thing earlier. We were talking about how Jupiter protects us from meteors, but it's like, well, why would there be meteors in the first place? You see what I mean? Like, we can kind of come up with these explanations for things, but they're almost ad hoc in a sense. And so it's almost, if you look at the whole picture, it doesn't quite, you know, like if we are a design, I have to say we are a very strange design, right? Because we seem to work within all the rules of physics and all the rules of like the observable universe that we seem to have found so far. And there doesn't seem to be any breakings of those rules. Are there oddities and things that are really hard to wrap our heads around? Yeah, for sure. But I don't know if I've seen anything that could not be explained yet without some sort of explanation. And maybe there are some things out there, but again, the link to that, going from there to a creator God, I think is, you know, it's a whole other ball game there.
If we're to be honest, we could be designed better.
Yeah, that's true too. That's true too.
Yes, but pointing out the flaws in someone's design only further points to a designer.
Does it? Huh.
Yes, because nature doesn't make mistakes.
Well, I think, mistakes, that's kind of a subjective human way of looking at things, right? I mean, what you would call a mistake, what I would call a mistake might be different than what somebody else might call a mistake. So I don't know if that's...
I think that's what y'all are pointing out.
Maybe. I mean, I don't know. If I was born with some sort of, you know, deformity... I guess that would be like a different from the standard norm, right? That's definitely a derivative of that. But just because we have normative ideas of what we think things should be, doesn't necessarily mean that a designer was there in that process. That's just the values of human judgment, I think, there. I don't think there's anything outside of that that's really calling what's good and what's bad, right?
Oh, well, if you go by the definition of agency, and the universe does have agency. It just doesn't make mistakes like a human would, because we're humans.
Yeah, but also, I mean, if we're talking about a perfect creator here as well, then he wouldn't make mistakes, right?
Yeah, but I don't know how. Well, we could go into like how perfect God is, but that would have to be after we've concluded that there is a God. Otherwise, we might be wasting time.
Maybe so. Yeah, I can see where you can go with that. I do have some other callers that I do want to get to tonight before we wrap up the show. But Adrian, thanks for having a good conversation with us.
Now you know what I believe and why.
That's right. And we fulfilled the mission statement of this show. And it was really good conversation. So, yeah, thanks for being civil with us. Thanks for having that with us. And I'd love to talk to you about it again sometime, for sure.
Thanks, Adrian.
Yes, sir. I'm a huge fan.
Thanks, Adrian. I love that. Thanks, and keep watching the show. So, okay, there we go. We had a conversation about arguments from design and stuff. And you know what? Nobody yelled at each other. So that's a that's a positive. I think.
Maybe the next one.
Maybe the next one for sure. But no, that's what I was talking about with Dean, right? Like these things definitely give me pause where it's like, that's really interesting. But my brain just doesn't go, yes, the best explanation is a creator God.
That's right. I think that's where you need to branch out with, and actually speak with biologists, speak with scientists, speak with geologists, actually see what they're doing and how they're doing it and why they're doing it. And you everything expands and opens up and you realize, wow, okay, there are people exploring other avenues. Going forward, yeah.
And you can't have it both ways either. You can't say, oh, look at all these things that work in our favor, and then also say, oh, but look at all these things that don't. And work in our favor in spite, because then it's a circular argument there, It is
right. I live in a country where we have the most poisonous animals in the world, so that's not a very good.
Well, what it means is we weren't designed to live in Australia, clearly.
That's right.
You're going against God's plan, I think, Mr. Bear.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to get to these last two calls here tonight before we wrap things up. First, I want to go to Quentin in Fargo. Hey, Quentin, how's it going?
Hey, guys. I'm doing okay. How about you?
Doing all right. Having some great conversations. Would love to hear what you want to talk to us about.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk. So start off, I'm an atheist. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to talk about the Kalam cosmological argument and the equivocation fallacy that I think it commits. Just by what I said, do you guys have any idea of what I'm about to say? Because, if we're just going to be talking about a bunch of stuff we already kind of know about, then I'd love to give more time to the next caller.
Well, I think this show we don't talk too much. I mean, apologetics definitely comes up. This definitely isn't a super apologetics focused show. But if you want to kind of I think the three of us could probably surmise what the Kalam cosmological is and how creates that equivocation fallacy. But I mean, you're already on the call with us. You've been waiting. Go ahead and give us your take, and I'd love to hear it. Maybe we can make it a bit of a shorter call, but I want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, so the equivocation fallacy that comes in, I'll just read the argument. So it's two premises and one conclusion. So premise one, whatever begins to exist has a cause. Premise two, the universe began to exist. Conclusion, therefore, the universe had a cause. And, they'll go, most apologists will go off and they'll talk about how that universe, the causation for the universe must be God, right? Immaterial, timeless, spaceless, etc. But my equivocation fallacy kind of problem that I see is within premise 1 and 2 with the phrase begins to exist. Because we can take a look at the world around us and we can ask ourselves, well, what does it mean to begin to exist? Because premise 1 and premise 2 are clearly meaning two different things. Begins to exist in premise 2, most apologists will argue creation ex nihilo, right? Creation from nothing.
Sure, yeah.
And when we're talking about creation from nothing, we're talking about a literal lack of attributes. We're not just talking about, the lack of air molecules in a bell jar, right? That's not nothing because there's still space and time.
Yes.
And so when they argue for the universe beginning to exist in that sense, one could argue that it's completely nonsensical, but this isn't what we see, things beginning to exist in the real world, and that's not what they mean in premise 1.
Yes.
In premise 1, what we see is beginning to exist, meaning a reconstruction of what has already existed.
Yes. We've never witnessed, you and I have never witnessed something beginning to exist, right? Because at least in the sense they mean, because we're always seeing other things turn into other things. Yeah, I'm with you there.
Yeah, and the best way that, people can see this, and, with apologists like William Lane Craig, right? I mean, he can present this argument with such bravado and, class and all of the scientific arguments that he thinks support it. He can present it with all of these pieces of evidence and arguments for it. But even he will admit to this. He'll kind of shroud it with, the way he says it. because he'll say things along the lines of, did I not begin to exist? Like, I clearly didn't exist at one point. But he strategically leaves out the fact that, well, William Lane Craig and like you and I came from a sperm and egg, which previously existed, in other people's bodies, that were reconstructed over time through like nutrients and just growth of a typical human.
Yes. And we're the result of all the food we've ever eaten, which explains a lot about how I look. But, it's matter. It's all, stuff we can actually point to, right?
Yeah. And right away, I mean, besides the fact that this argument, doesn't end with, therefore God exists. This is probably the easiest way to point out like a giant problem with the Kalam, because it does conflate this idea of beginning to exist, and any example that they try and give of something coming from nothing is just going to end up being the universe, and then you're just begging the question.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, and this argument is super tricky. It is very, very tricky if you're not paying too close attention, because it can sound pretty convincing. But like if you were doing what we're doing exactly right now, where we're really looking at the terms, right? We're really looking at the definitions of what we mean when we say we begin to exist, and all this other kinds of stuff, then it really doesn't hold as much water as it would for some people. The Kalam cosmological arguments was one of the first real apologetics I ever heard. And I remember the first time I heard it, I was like, there's something that doesn't quite sound right about this argument, but I couldn't quite figure this out. And I remember looking this up and that was one of my first exposure to some atheist videos, was people kind of breaking this particular argument down, because if you think about it too much there's something that's not quite right about it. I don't know if you had experience with this argument when you were a believer, Mr. Bear, or if it was ever part of your background at all.
No, absolutely. I'm so glad you brought this one up, because there's two main things about this one. And you're quite right. When it says one, whatever begins to exist, it falls apart straight away. It's just incredible how that just collapses. And the whole thing is with William Lane Craig, which I'm glad you mentioned, is that he rephrases the whole thing to say the universe has a cause. It's just an assumption. So I'm so glad you brought this one up, because the whole thing just collapses upon itself like a demolition. It's incredible how this one just comes apart. And like you say, Dan, it's when you hear it, it's very convincing how it's worded. But when you stop and read and think and reason, you go, well, point one falls apart straight away. So
yeah, and picture
it's
this.
Crazy.
Picture this. You're in an apologetics class. You're with other people who's trying to figure this stuff out. You're already pressured to believe what the people are telling you are saying, because you're in a class and you're trying to pass, right? And so you may not be as equipped to think as critically about this kinds of stuff. And that's not a slight against people who are taking these kinds of classes or trying to figure this stuff out or hearing this stuff for the first time, but rather an explanation to look at why people are really convinced by this argument. Because when you're hearing this stuff, chances are it's maybe in the context of a Christian gathering, and you're not as primed to be as skeptical about this kind of stuff.
It makes you nod along. Yeah. That's right. That's true. Yeah. Okay. True. God exists.
Yeah, exactly. So definitely something worth investigating, but you have to have the right minds and people looking at this kind of stuff. So Quentin, I'm really glad that you brought it up today. And I hopefully, maybe this is somebody's first time hearing this and wondering why this argument doesn't make sense. I think maybe you put it into a great explanation of why it doesn't. So thanks for doing that with us.
Yeah, thanks.
Hey, well, thank you guys very much. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Have a great rest of your night here. It's so funny. I'm a little rusty on my apologetics stuff. Matt Dillahunt, he's kind of been looking at me, glaring at me for some of the stuff I've been saying tonight. But it's just not. It's almost like I've been done with it for a while. You know what I mean? And when I go up to it, it's like going back to an old gravesite of like, oh yeah, this is where this idea died for me. You know what I mean? Yeah, and here's why it died.
Yeah. Yeah, there's nothing new, is there? It starts to spin around a little bit in a rinse cycle.
It's not, it may be not new for us, but there's always going to be people encountering this stuff for the first time. I mean, it's going to happen every single day.
Yeah.
And it is worth talking about and examining, because like Dean was saying, hey, when was the last time you thought about this stuff, right? Are you still critically thinking about this stuff? And I totally am. At least I think I am. Maybe for Dean, I'm not thinking enough, but we'll see. I want to get to our last. Yeah, let's get to our last call for tonight. This is Prim in California. Hey, Prim, how's it going?
Going well. How are you, Dan? How are you, Bear?
Doing fine. I can't speak for the bear.
Good.
I think the bear's doing okay too. Mr. Bear, excuse me. We were talking.
Excuse me.
Gotta get the right.
Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
It's a formal title, Mr. Bear. We can't just throw it around willy nilly. Well, Prim, what did you want to talk to us about tonight?
I would like to talk to you about the one true God that I have found physical evidence for.
The one true God that you found physical evidence for. Yes. What is that?
That is coffee.
Oh, coffee. Okay.
I wasn't expecting that.
Yes, it is definitely the supreme being.
The supreme being. Can I tell you guys something? I do not drink coffee. I drink coffee very sparingly and only if it's offered to me. But I do not actively go out and buy coffee. I'm almost Mormon in that sense. I've never been a coffee drinker. So I guess that makes me, in this religion, I'm like a non-believer because I'm just not, I don't think coffee's supreme, right?
Yes, infidel, but coffee still loves you.
Well, that's good. That's good. Was this what this whole call was about? You just wanted to spread the good news, or was there anything else you want to talk about?
I want to make sure everyone knows that coffee awaits them. Coffee will fill them. Coffee will provide meaning to their life.
Well,
I'm so glad you didn't roast us.
Oh my God. I need to get out of here. Please. Somebody take me out. I can't.
Coffee did roast for you.
Man, I'm glad that you could give us the good word. Again, it's not really for me. I guess I'm a coffee atheist or whatever. It's not. I guess I believe coffee exists. I guess I just don't worship it, right? So that's like I don't know what that would make me, but it is what it is, right?
One last thing, there may have been life before coffee, but why? There was no reason for that.
I like it. It's a great way to end tonight's show here.
At least there's plenty of witnesses to coffee.
That's right. That's right. That's true. I can attest to coffee's existence, several 100 years ago and stuff like that. Yeah. I think there's enough I think we have contemporary historical records of coffee. So yeah, for sure. All right. Well, Prem, thanks again for spreading the good news. And I bid you well on your quest to tell others about the faith. So yeah, keep it up.
Thank you. We Arabicans try to stick together. But
Bless.
Good stuff. Blessed. Yes. Take care, Prim. And on that note, I think that wraps up a really great episode of Truth Wanted here. I want to thank again Mr. Bear for being on tonight as a guest. And Mr.
Thanks
Bear,
so much. It's been fun. It's been great.
Yeah, I would love to have you on again sometime. Mr. Bear, where can people find you at if they want to figure out, what you're up to?
Yeah, sure. Look, I'm on Twitter at Mr. Bear Atheist.
And YouTube as well, I imagine? Yes.
YouTube, of course. Yeah, YouTube, the normal address / Mr. Bear Atheist.
There you go. Is there like a period in there? Or is there any special characters or?
No special characters, just all one word.
MRBAAR. Yeah, BEAR. My goodness. Woo! Okay, yeah. So, as always, this is Truth Wanted. This is a weekly call-in show hosted here at the Atheist Community of Austin. I cannot do this show every week without a wonderful crew that helps me out here in the back. Crew, go ahead and show yourselves and give yourselves a round of applause. Thanks for being there every single week to help make this thing a reality. I also want to thank the folks that donate on Patreon, and you can donate to Patreon as well. If you go to patreon.com/truthwanted, all the money for that show goes directly into this show and making this show better, and the Atheist Community of Austin as well. If you want to get in touch with me, maybe you want to be on the show, maybe you have questions about the show, you can do that at truth@atheist-community.org. You can also find the Truth Wanted Facebook group, and I'm on Twitter at ObjectivelyDan, so check it out there. And this show is also available on other platforms, Spotify, iTunes, wherever else you might get your podcasts at. And it's going to be on YouTube as well, so please like and subscribe if you have not already. Any last and final thoughts before we wrap up tonight's episode, Mr. Bear?
Oh, look, just to anyone having any doubts about your belief or how you feel, just keep exploring, keep reading, keep talking, travel, explore the world, listen, converse, discourse. Go for it. You never know what you'll find.
Yes. And call into the show. Also, go into the Discord as well. We are going to do an after show little chat in the Discord. We're going to keep it kind of light tonight. We might go 15, 30 minutes. We'll see how it goes. But we're going to go right into the Discord here. We seem to be having a really good time with that. So if you're watching this live, join us on the Atheist Community of Austin Discord. And we'll be in there in just a second. Mr. Bear, thanks again for coming on tonight.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, of course. And thank you, listeners, for watching. Remember, always keep wanting the truth, and I'll see you next time.
What are we doing, man? What are we doing?
No, you're done.